sat at the kitchen table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had been a few months since their youngest daughter Emily got married and moved into her own home. Across from him, Linda folded the morning newspaper and sighed. It feels different, doesn't it? Mark looked up. What does? This house? Us? Everything? Mark nodded. Yeah. For 30 years we were parents first. Now it's just us. Linda gave him a small smile. So what do we do now? Ever since their kids left, Mark and Linda had been going through an adjustment period. At first they loved the freedom. No school schedules, no noisy dinner tables, no last-minute emergencies. But slowly, a strange feeling crept in. The house felt too big. The dinners felt too quiet. Even weekends, once filled with soccer games and birthday parties, now stretched out with nothing planned. One evening, Linda found Mark sitting alone on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. She sat beside him. You miss them, don't you? She asked softly. Mark hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, I do. Linda nodded. Me too. The first few months after Emily got married, Mark called her almost every day. At first, she answered happily, but over time, her responses became shorter. One evening, he called and she didn't pick up. A few minutes later, she texted, Hey Dad, busy right now, I'll call later. Later never came. Mark frowned, staring at his phone. She doesn't call as much anymore. Linda, setting the table for dinner, shrugged. She's busy, Mark. She's starting her own life. Mark frowned. I know, but is it so bad to want to be involved? Linda sat down across from him. There's a difference between being involved and holding on too tight. Mark sighed. He had always been the protector, the provider. Letting go wasn't easy. One Saturday afternoon, Mark suggested they visit Emily and her husband unannounced. Linda hesitated. Shouldn't we call first? Mark waved her off. Come on, we're her parents. We don't need an invitation. When they arrived, they knocked and waited. After a moment, Emily opened the door, surprised. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Mark chuckled. We were in the neighborhood, thought we'd stop by. Emily glanced back inside, hesitant. Now's not really a great time. From behind her, her husband appeared, looking polite but slightly uncomfortable. The tension was obvious. Mark forced a smile. We won't stay long. Emily sighed. Dad, we love you, but we need our own space. The words stung. On the drive home, Mark was silent. Linda finally spoke. See, it's not that they don't love us. They just need to build their own life, like we did when we got married. Mark exhaled. So what are we supposed to do now? Linda smiled. We start focusing on us again. That night, Mark and Linda sat at the dinner table. Usually they talked about the kids. But tonight, Linda asked, What's something you've always wanted to do but never had time for? Mark thought for a moment. I always wanted to take a cross-country road trip. Linda grinned. Then let's do it. Mark blinked. Wait, what? Linda laughed. Why not? The kids have their lives now. Maybe it's time we start living ours again. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt excitement, real excitement. A few weeks later, they packed up their car and hit the road. Along the way, they laughed, explored, and rediscovered what made them fall in love in the first place. One evening they sat by a campfire under the stars. Mark turned to Linda. "You were right. We spent so much time being parents that we forgot how to be us." Linda smiled. Better late than never. Their phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Hey, Dad, miss you guys. When you get back, let's have dinner." Mark chuckled. Looks like letting go brings them back in its own way. Linda took his hand. "Told you so." One day, Mark and Linda were invited to a dinner at Emily's house. Excited, they arrived with homemade desserts, eager to spend time with her and her husband. As they ate, Mark started offering advice: how to organize the kitchen better, how to balance their budget, even suggesting how to arrange their furniture. Emily smiled politely, but seemed tense. Her husband nodded, but didn't say much. After dinner, as they were leaving, Emily hugged them and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom and Dad. We love having you over. As guests." The word guests hit Mark hard. On the drive home, Linda turned to him. "We're not the main characters in their story anymore, Mark. We're supporting roles now." Mark sighed. "I guess I never thought about it like that." Lesson: when your children start their own families, you shift from being their guide to being a guest in their lives. Respecting that role is key to keeping the relationship strong. One morning, Linda walked into the kitchen to find Mark sitting alone, flipping through old vacation photos. "We used to go on trips all the time," he muttered. Linda sat beside him. "Then let's go again." Mark looked at her, confused. "Just us?" Linda chuckled. "Why not? Do you realize we've spent the last 30 years talking mostly about the kids? What about us, Mark? What do we want now?" Mark hesitated. He had spent so long being a father first that he had almost forgotten how to just be a husband. That weekend, they booked a trip to the mountains, rekindling their sense of adventure and rediscovering each other outside of their roles as parents. Lesson: a strong marriage evolves. When the kids leave, it's time to focus on being a couple again. At a neighborhood barbecue, Mark noticed something odd. He and Linda barely had close friends anymore. Most of their old friendships revolved around their children's activities, soccer games, school events, PTA meetings. But now, those connections had faded. Later that night, Mark admitted, "I think we lost touch with people outside of the kids." Linda nodded. "Maybe it's time we find new friends." So they joined a local hiking group, started going to dance classes, and even hosted game nights for other couples in the same stage of life. Slowly, their social circle grew, not because of their kids, but because of their own interests. Lesson: friendships change when kids leave home. Building a new social life keeps this phase of life exciting and fulfilling. One evening, Emily called, sounding stressed. "Dad, our car broke down and we're not sure what to do. Any advice?" Mark was ready to jump in, offer to pay for repairs, call his own mechanic, even drive over to help. But Linda placed a hand on his arm and whispered, "Just give advice. Let them handle it." So, instead, Mark simply said, "I'd recommend checking with Play first. If that doesn't work, I know a good mechanic." A few days later, Emily called again. "Thanks, Dad. We got it fixed. Felt good handling it ourselves." Mark smiled, realizing something. His role had changed from fixer to advisor, and that was okay. Lesson: parents of grown children should offer guidance, not control. Letting them figure things out builds their confidence and keeps the relationship healthy.